June 6, 1944. The Berghof, Obersalzberg. The morning fog was hanging tough on the mountain peaks, putting a lid on Hitler's fancy pad. Inside, the vibe was tense, man. Real tense. The Führer had crashed late, thanks to the knockout pills his doc was feeding him. For a few hours, the war was someone else's problem. Then the first bits of intel started rolling in. Not to his main HQ, but right here, to his chill spot. The Allies were making a move, somewhere in France. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel and General Alfred Jodl were posted up in the big hall, their boots quiet on the pricey rugs. They were holding thin pieces of paper fresh from the teleprinters, their voices low but their backs stiff as boards. An invasion. But where was the main event? Hitler, now awake and in his usual plain gray jacket, listened to the first reports. You could bet his face wasn't scared. It was calculating, sizing things up. He'd had a gut feeling for ages. The Pas de Calais, the narrowest hop over the channel. It made the most sense. His intuition, that voice in his head he trusted more than any of his generals, told him so. And the intel backed it up. The Allies had a huge force, the 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, led by the legendary General George Patton, just waiting across from Calais. German spy planes, the few that could get past the Allied Air Force, had seen a ton of landing craft. Their turned spies, played by the British, kept singing the same tune. It was all a giant con job, Operation Fortitude, and on this damp June morning, it was paying off big time. As more reports came in about paratroopers in Normandy and Navy guns blasting the coast, Hitler's doubt turned into stone-cold certainty. This was a fake-out, a distraction. A big, messy, bloody distraction, sure, but a distraction all the same. He turned to Jodl, his voice probably a low growl. This ain't the main show. The real punch is coming at the Pas de Calais. The order went out. The powerful 15th Army, with its tank divisions, the big guns that could shove an invasion back into the ocean, would stay put. They'd wait. They'd watch the strait. Over in Normandy, the scattered units of the 7th Army would have to handle this diversion by themselves. In the cozy rooms of the Berghof, the biggest crisis in the West was being met not with a smart play, but with frozen fear. The fate of the Atlantic Wall was being decided not on the beaches, but in the confused head of one dude, hundreds of miles away. 5:30 a.m., Omaha Beach, Normandy, France. The whole world just blew to hell. The ramp of your Higgins boat dropped into the churning, chest-deep water, and bam, the air was torn up by the sound you'd been dreading, the ripping cloth scream of MG-42 machine guns. A guy to your left, some kid from Iowa maybe, folded into the surf, the water around him turning a nasty dark red. "Get out, move, get off the damn boat!" A sergeant was screaming, his voice almost lost in the insane noise of big shells flying overhead and the crack of rifles from the cliffs above. You pushed forward, your M1 Garand held high, your soaked wool uniform and heavy pack trying to drag you under. The water was ice cold. The German obstacles, metal crosses and big gates, were everywhere, messing up the landing craft and funneling guys right into the kill zones. This was the real deal at Omaha Beach, a stretch of sand named for some far-off American city, now the place where the whole invasion was going down. The early morning Navy bombardment, supposed to wipe out the German defenses, had mostly missed. The concrete gun nests, dug into the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc and the bluffs of Colleville-sur-Mer, were still standing. Their firing lines were set up perfect, a real work of defensive genius by the German commander, Lieutenant General Dietrich Kreis, of the 352nd Infantry Division. His men, a mix of tough Eastern Front vets and new guys, weren't the pushovers intelligence said they'd be. They were trained, armed, and shooting from perfect cover. From his command post further inland, the first reports hitting General Kreis looked good. The landing was being held back. The Americans were pinned down at the water's edge. The tide was coming in, drowning the wounded and washing bodies back and forth. On the beach, there was nowhere to hide. Just the shingle, a bank of small stones that gave a tiny bit of cover from the direct fire from the bluffs. Here, the leaders were getting taken out. Units were all mixed up and confused. A colonel from the 1st Infantry Division, the famous Big Red one, was wading through the mess, trying to get a bunch of stunned survivors together. "Two kinds of people are staying on this beach," he growled. "The dead and those who are gonna die. Now let's get the hell out of here." But the ways off the beach, the draws at Vierville, Les Moulins, and Colville, were locked down by concrete bunkers and endless machine gun fire. For the guys on Omaha, the big plan for D-Day had shrunk to one simple, desperate goal: make it through the next 10 seconds. Late morning, June 6th, the Berghof, Obersalzberg. The clean, quiet mountain vibe of the Berghof was long gone. The big hall had turned into a makeshift command post, the air hazy with cigarette smoke and a rising bad feeling. The teleprinters wouldn't shut up, and the staff officers were moving faster, their cool starting to crack. The chill, dismissive mood from Hitler's morning was disappearing. The reports from Normandy weren't just bits and pieces anymore. They were a flood, a wave of desperate messages painting a picture of a fight on a whole other level. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the head of Army Group B, had always said the first 24 hours would be everything. "The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. For the Allies, as well as Germany, it will be the longest day," he told his assistant. Now, his guys in France were screaming for the tank reserves. But the order to let them loose, especially the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend and the Panzerlehr Division, was still stuck at the top, with Hitler himself. General Jodl, sticking to the Führer's first call, didn't want to bother him again to ask for them. Crucial hours were slipping away. Then, the tone of the reports changed. It wasn't just about a few paratroopers or commando raids anymore. It was about the sheer massive size of the attack. The number of Allied divisions hitting the beaches was climbing. The size of the Navy fleet, over 5,000 ships, was being confirmed by guys on the coast who said the horizon was packed with them. And then came the specific, scary details from Omaha. The first German reports about holding the line were getting replaced by panicked updates about breakthroughs. Small, desperate groups of American infantry, led by junior officers and sergeants who knew staying on the beach meant a coffin, had started climbing the bluffs. They were using ropes, their bare hands, finding paths the Germans thought no one could use. They were getting around the deadly strong points, hitting the bunkers from behind. An aide came into the hall with a new message, his face white. He handed it straight to Keitel, who read it, his own cool starting to evaporate. He went up to Hitler, who was staring at a big, unrolled map. "Mein Führer," Keitel started, his voice tight. "The reports from Widerstandsnest 62. The Americans are breaking through at Vierville and Colleville. The size of their push. It's not a diversion. The Navy guns, the number of guys. This is the main invasion force." Hitler's eyes, you can picture them, got narrow. The whole story about the Pas de Calais fake-out, Patton's ghost army, started to fall apart under the weight of this new, terrifying evidence. The pure, brutal guts of the Americans on Omaha Beach, a fight so expensive it had to be for the biggest prize, was the final, undeniable proof. The diversion was a fantasy. The real fight for Fortress Europe had started, not at the narrow Strait of Dover, but on the windy, body-covered sands of Normandy. The realization hit his face, not as panic, but as a cold, burning anger. He'd been played. Late afternoon, June 6th. The Berghof, Obersalzberg. The oh crap moment passed, replaced by the crazy scramble of a command trying to get a handle on a situation going sideways fast. The cozy, wood-covered hall was now the center of a storm. Hitler's first wave of anger had turned into a cold, sharp focus. The maps weren't just pictures anymore. They were live battlefields, and the red markers for Allied landings were popping up like crazy. The focus wasn't on the Pas de Calais anymore. It was on the 5 invasion beaches, and especially on the bloody mess at Omaha. The sheer size of the fight there, the fact that the Americans were brawling for every inch of sand and paying for it in blood, was the ultimate sign. No general would waste his best assault troops on just a trick. "Jodl," the name cut through the low talk of the officers. The general was next to him in a flash. The time for waiting was over. The Führer's finger, you can see it, jamming down on the Normandy map. The order, held up for almost 12 terrible hours, was finally given. The 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, its young, fanatical soldiers and powerful Panther tanks waiting near Lisieux, was to roll out immediately to the Caen area to stop the British and Canadian pushes from Gold, Juno, and Sword Beaches. The top-tier Panzer Lehr Division, one of the baddest armored units in the whole German army, was to counterattack the American beachheads from its spot further south. But the delay was a killer. The golden chance, that small window to throw the invaders back into the sea before they could dig in, was almost shut. The orders, sent by radio and teleprinter, got the German tanks moving, but they were now racing against an enemy who owned the sky. As the first parts of the 12th SS started their drive, the clear June sky became their nightmare. Allied fighter bombers, British Typhoons, and American Thunderbolts dropped on them like hawks. The narrow, hedge-lined roads of the Bocage country, great for defense, became death traps for moving tanks. Tanks got blown to bits, trucks set on fire. Whole lines got wrecked before they even saw the enemy. The Panzer Lehr, forced to move in daylight because of the lost time, got the same treatment. The huge advantage of holding the tank reserves had been wasted. They were being thrown in not as one big knockout punch, but as separate cleanup crews, showing up one by one into a fight that had already gotten way bigger than anyone at the Berghof had thought possible just hours before. The invasion, which could have been stopped cold, had been allowed to take its first deep breath. Dusk, June 6th, 1944. The bluffs above Omaha Beach, Normandy. The constant, insane noise of the day was dying down, not to quiet, but to a different, creepier sound. The huge Navy guns were now aiming further inland, hunting for German backups and supply dumps. The rattle of guns was now here and there, mixed with the thump of mortar rounds as the front line settled just past the coastal towns. You, one of the lucky ones, the wiped out, the shocked survivors, sit with your back against the dirt wall of a shell crater you helped take. Below, the tide is going out, showing the full, horrible price of the day. The sand is covered with the junk of war, wrecked landing craft, burned out tanks, and the still, dark shapes of the dead, their bodies gently moved by the waves. The salty air is thick with the smells of gunpowder, wet wool, and death. The breakthrough, when it happened, wasn't one big heroic charge. It was 100 desperate small fights. It was engineers blowing holes in the seawall while getting shot at. It was a lieutenant from the 29th Division gathering 20 guys from 20 different squads and leading them up a path to take out a machine gun nest with grenades and bayonets. It was the U.S. Navy destroyers, seeing the slaughter on the beach, bravely sailing in so close they almost hit the bottom, to blast the German strongpoints from point-blank range. By late afternoon, the draws of Vierville, Les Moulins, and Colville were finally, weakly, in American hands. A shaky perimeter was set up on the bluffs. The beach wasn't a kill zone anymore, but a messy, jam-packed but working landing area. The first waves of more troops, vehicles, and supplies were now pushing inland, backing up the bleeding, beaten-up spearhead. Back at the Berghof, the mood was dark. The evening reports laid it all out. The Allies had grabbed all 5 beachheads. A thin but solid front line now ran along the Normandy coast. The counterattacks by the tank divisions had been slowed down, messed up, and hammered from the air. The big con of Fortitude, though, was still messing with their heads. Even now, with the battle raging in Normandy, Hitler and High Command were still partly sure that a second, bigger landing at the Pas de Calais was coming. This leftover fear would keep the 15th Army, a huge force of over 150,000 men, stuck staring at an empty channel for 7 more critical weeks. The decision made from arrogance and trickery in the morning had, by nightfall, become a total disaster. The Atlantic Wall had been cracked open, the second front was a go, and as the sun went down on the blood-soaked sand of Omaha Beach, the long, nasty road to Berlin had its start. The longest day was done, but the fight for Normandy was just getting started.